You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill. This week, Jean-Claude Van Damme is a Timecop with a Lionheart. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani will come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then, both will have to pick a number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode. One will have 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin. I am Adam Thomas, and Thomas, that dude's gonna kill you. Don't you know that? That dude's gonna kill you, Thomas.
And I'm Thomas Mariani, and I better make sure I avoid that dude killing me while I keep my sweet-ass 2004 era mullet.
Aw, yeah.
Yeah, so welcome everybody to the Double-Edged Double Bill, where every week Adam and I pick 2 movies at random. One has 2 good movies, the other has 2 bad movies. We switch up on quality for that kind of thing. But we do them around a subject, and the subject as chosen by our patrons, our edgelord patrons at patreon.com/DEDBpod, which we'll talk about near the end of the show a bit more. They chose between 2 action stars for us to devote an entire episode to, and we ended up with Jean-Claude Van Damme, who we talked about previously on the show in one of our favorite bad movies, No Retreat, No Surrender, in his minor, very early role in that brilliant film. But Adam, I know you have been really wanting to do this episode for a while because you were a big fan of Jean-Claude growing up, right? He was one of the big action stars, along with, like, people who've done previous episodes on, like, Stallone and Schwarzenegger. Like, Van Damme sort of sits at a solid, like, bronze, I guess, with those.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, maybe not for me. When I was a kid, he was probably the silver. It was definitely probably Schwarzenegger, Van Damme, and Stallone for me. But yeah, I definitely grew up just with a huge sort of admiration and fascination with Jean-Claude movies. And I mean, I've seen them all probably for the most part, and some of them ad nauseum. He was like my guy growing up for sure.
And what do you think sort of separates him from sort of like the Stallones and the Schwarzeneggers? What do you think makes him so distinct, besides maybe his Belgian heritage?
Definitely his looks, for sure, and the style of sort of action movies he does, like the martial arts sort of aspect of it, and his sort of fighting style and martial arts technique are unlike anybody else's out there. Not to say that they're better or good necessarily, but nobody else was fighting like this guy with the mix of ballet and with, the typical karate and stuff like that. Like, he was just incredibly unique.
Yeah, I think, because a big thing is, I have mentioned previously, I grew up a lot with Schwarzenegger, and Stallone I caught up with more gradually. With Mr. JCVD, I was not privy to much of his filmography until pretty much researching for this show. Like, before this show, I had seen him in No Retreat, No Surrender, obviously, the Expendables 2, which he's also in, and then the 2 Kung Fu Panda movies where he voices a crocodile. That had been most of my exposure to his filmography, until fairly recently, when we've been doing some movie night stuff off mic, and I've been watching a lot more of his movies. And I think with a bit more Jean-Claude under my belt, I think the big thing is that he kind of has a middle ground between Stallone and Schwarzenegger, because he has that sort of like foreigner attempting to like sort of fit into an American action hero mold of Schwarzenegger, and he also has a bit of like the physical fitness of Stallone from when he was coming onto the scene, when, Stallone looked like a human being. And I think that's what Jean-Claude, even as big as he was, he also had at that time, is that he looked buff, but buff in a human way, not like Schwarzenegger, like I'm a Greek statue come to life kind of thing. He felt like buff in a realistic fashion. But then I think the thing that makes him particularly separate from both of them is the flexibility. Not just him doing the splits, obviously his big trademark, but also his fucking flexible face that wasn't stone faced at all, just like very rubbery and able to move around as much as possible.
I mean, going for the money shot, birdie, whatever you want to call it, with each emotion, constantly, just over emoting.
Do you think potentially he's a better actor than either Stallone or Schwarzenegger or other action hero types, or do you think he's kind of like really maybe fallen off even more so than them in recent years?
The thing is, I think he's gotten better as he's gotten older. Where sort of Stallone and Arnold have fallen into like just old hat bullshit, especially like watch Sabotage or The Expendables with Stallone, or even with Arnold in that. They're kind of just want to play the same type of character they did in the 80s and early 90s. Whereas Van Damme he's done a lot more weird stuff lately, taken a lot more chances, makes fun of himself a lot more now, and sort of is buying into his whole gimmick as the handsome, sexy martial arts guy. And he's, like I said, he's only gotten better for it.
Yeah, I think a lot of that probably comes from the fact that he had, at least behind the scenes, a lot more of a sort of bigger fall from grace. Because like Schwarzenegger and Stallone fell out of popularity, but their fall wasn't nearly as like publicly, filled with drug addiction and kind of like egomaniacal behavior that was like destructive a lot more. So I think he kind of like was humbled by an experience like that. But yeah, especially watching sort of his 90s movies, you can tell that there was like, you can see how an ego was inflated in the late 80s, early 90s, and then by the time you get to some of his more introspective and sort of deprecating works, I think he has a lot more potential range. But then again, that's also in a sea of like straight-to-video movies he does now, most of which I've heard are not great.
No. I haven't seen most of them. But yeah, that's what I've heard too. I heard most are pretty awful.
And plus, also, he was a guy who, kind of like a Stallone, was also a bit more involved, like, with behind-the-scenes stuff. Like, he would be, like, a big writer and producer type of person on some of his projects. And even he directed a couple, I know. At least there's, like, The Quest, which I've heard is, like, an infamous kind of failure. And then there's that one that, like, he directed apparently, like, a decade ago and still hasn't, like, officially gotten a release.
Yeah. And also in a lot of his older ones, too, he was also a lot of times the fight choreographer, if not the actual action director too.
Right.
Like sometimes he would be the one who direct the fight scenes, which a lot of people, that classic sort of 80s motif where it shows the same shot over and over and over from different angles.
We're going to talk about that with at least one of our movies in particular.
That is him. That is all his style. He loves to do it.
By the way, the movie I was referring to is Frenchie, is the title apparently of this movie. He shot in 2012 and has been attempting to be finished over the last decade or so. His second directorial effort. But we're not talking about that film, or a lot of the other ones. We're talking about two specific ones that, as I mentioned at the end of our last episode, we picked our good and bad feature for this particular week, for this Jean-Claude Van Damme focused episode. Our good pick, which was Adam's choice, ended up being Timecop from 1994, and then the bad pick, which I chose, was Lionheart from 1991. But first we're going to talk about Timecop.
In the year 2004, time travel is a reality.
You're charged with violations of TEC Code 40.8, time travel with intent to alter the future.
And a crime.
It turns out going back in time is a pretty easy way to make money. The genie is already out of the bottle. The technology is there.
Now, one man.
You ever hear the name Aaron McComb?
Is about to take the ultimate power trip.
He's gonna be president. You don't need the press, you don't need endorsements, you don't even need the truth. You need money.
But to enforce the laws of time.
Are we still together in 10 years? Am I dead?
One man is determined to stop him.
I cannot go back to save her. This scumbag is not going back to steal money.
Stay here, Walker. I think you planned too far ahead.
Jean-Claude Van Damme. Ron Silver.
Will you get him?
Mia Sara.
So Timecop came out September 16th, 1994, directed by Peter Hyams, who we've talked about a few times on the show with stuff like Outland and End of Day, speaking of Arnold, our previous ones we talked about on the show. But it's written by Mark Verheiden, based on a comic book that he and Mike Richardson created, though I know apparently this wasn't very strict to the source material necessarily.
I mean, no, not really. The comic is I hate to say this, but it wasn't very good. I never got into it, man, and I tried because it is a really cool sort of idea. It's just the comic was just it was junk.
Right. I mean, even though this is the good pick, I do like it. It's fair to say this is also junk, but very watchable, well-made junk, I would argue, which I think is kind of the appeal of the best for Jean-Claude. And this one was at least the most successful one. It is still his highest-grossing star vehicle, and the only one to crack over $100 million, making $102 million back in '94. So, lots of money.
Huge movie, dude. Like obviously this wasn't an event like a T2 or those type of action movies that we talked about before, but yeah, everybody I knew saw this movie. Like everybody, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, all of us saw this movie to the point where I had one aunt who like chastised my parents because they let me watch this movie with the really awkward sex scene that happens in it. But I can't believe you let your son watch that. My dad's like, that's not how anybody does it, so what does it matter? He was like, the time travel's more believable than the sex scene. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. That still holds true.
Very true, very true. But Adam, so this was your good pick, and would you say maybe this is the best Jean-Claude film?
I don't know. There's one that you've sort of brought to light recently that thinking back on it might be better, but it's one of the most polished ones he's done for sure. It's really good. It's not necessarily my favorite one of his, but yeah, this is, I mean, if you're talking just sort of achievement and storytelling and things like that, then yeah, this is definitely top tier Van Damme, I would say.
Yeah, I hadn't seen this until we watched it as a movie night thing, and I would definitely agree. I think it's neck and neck with the other Peter Hyams collaboration, which we'll mention a bit later in the show. But yeah, I think this is like such an efficient movie that what I like is that Hyams as a director, who I think is just underrated in general, is like a really efficient, fun, like B-movie action director in particular, is able to take a premise that's so fucking dumb. Like, there are so many holes you can poke in fucking Timecop. It's just like, none of this makes sense. I don't know what's going on. This is so silly. But because of his ability to, like, really make it move as quickly as it does, you don't give a single fuck. And you're just really enveloped in the silliness in a really charming way with the time travel, and also just like the action photography and all this other stuff, the choreography, everything is so good that you're really entranced. Just like, oh god, I just want to like keep watching this like fun action movie the whole time. You don't quite question it that much.
And, I've said elsewhere too, if you're watching a time travel movie and your biggest thing is, well, none of this makes sense, then why are you watching a time travel movie? Because of course it doesn't make sense. But yeah, there is a lot more you could sort of really, like you said, sort of, how did we get here with this one than you might with other ones? But it's just constant move. Like you said, it moves, man. This movie doesn't stop. It goes and goes and goes and goes. And I never really find myself sort of diagnosing any of the problems with it, because it is just really fun. It's a fun movie to watch.
Yeah, the ones that you question are just kind of ones that I didn't even think of until like we had, say, the second time travel sequence, which I love the way they do time travel with like inside this little rocket thing that just propels itself forward at a certain like speed, and then they eventually travel back in time. But it's this weird thing where like they're in this rocket, and then like they cut to like after the big like, oh god, we're traveling in time, and they don't show them getting out of the rocket or anything, and then
they just land in the
right, they just land in the water, and then when they travel, they just cut to the fucking rocket returning back to the docking station. I'm just like, where'd the rocket go? Where does the rocket go when they're not going?
Right, they hit this button to return. They walk through like a water bubble, and all of a sudden he's fastened in the rocket. Like, it doesn't make any sense. I agree, that is a little ridiculous. But so is, slapping a mullet on somebody and be like, well, it's 10 years older. Like, that's also a little ridiculous.
Yeah, so the basic premise, if you're not aware of Timecop, is we follow our titular Timecop, who is Agent Max Walker, played by Jean-Claude, who in the opening of the movie is, a cop who's been married to Mia Sarah, and he's about to be called in to this new task force about time travel that was just discovered. Very early in the movie, we also find out the cold open of sorts is time travel kind of being discovered. And before he can even go to have this meeting, there's a home invasion that happens, and while she's still in the house blows up, so she's killed in that explosion. And then we cut to 10 years later in 2004, a great futuristic 2004. Perfect. That all this bullshit doesn't exists somehow in 2004. He is a time cop who goes back in time to basically stop people from committing crimes in the future, including, as we see, somebody trying to take advantage of the stock market crashing in 1929 and buy all the stocks that are like at super low prices so they can end up making a lot of money. But when he stops this person, the guy's like, hey man, you can't take me back because I'm working for somebody. The senator who's going to try and like use time travel to become president and just like take over the world, basically. The senator played by the late, oh so great Ron Silver in this movie is just like fucking casually eating the scenery, which is what I love. If somebody can eat the scenery but just like really peck at it in a way that's just like nonchalant, just like, oh, here's some scenery here, I'll eat that. Here's a bit of that too. He is so phenomenal as a foil for Jean-Claude.
Oh yeah, definitely, dude. I mean, and he's got so many good little one-liners, and he's just such a mustache twirling villain, like right from the get. As soon as you see him, really, I mean, he's really really fun in this movie, man. He is a perfect sort of foil for the honestly rather subdued Van Damme, especially the future version. He's not the much of the Van Damme with the crazy noises and faces and all that as much as you're used to. He's talks quietly. He doesn't do a lot of the crazy noises or the screams and stuff in this one. It's not as over the top as a Van Damme as you might be used to.
That's right. I think this sort of hit at an interesting point because this was around the same time that like he was really getting into like his coke phase. But this feels like unlike some of his other movies he did around this time, especially like right after this. It feels like he's subdued but like melancholy in a way that really works. Like when he even, of course, has to go back to his apartment after he's done being a time cop for the day, and he just keeps watching the home videos of Mia Sara and stuff like that. Despite how very cliche that is as a concept, you actually do believe kind of that regret in his face. It feels like it's very genuine. In the same way that you believe, say, Ron Silver talking to his younger self in 1994. It's just like, hey, you know what, do me a favor, lay off the candy bars. His younger self just looks sad, like, oh, I like candy bars.
Oh, that's one of my favorite parts. That's one of my favorite parts of the movie, man. If me bashing your face turns you into a sniveling wimp, then maybe you shouldn't be in my employ anymore.
Okay, yeah, when he smacks his own fucking toady in the face.
Campaign advisor. There was some really fun action bits in this movie, too. Particularly the whole warehouse sort of shootout scene is really fun and exciting.
Yes.
You know, with the guy gets his arm frozen and all that stuff. Really, really cool. The ending scene is also really fun, the way they do it, with the way they break it up between the two. You know, because obviously, you know, spoiler alert, the two Van Dammes team up in a way, unbeknownst to them. Well, at least to the younger one. But how, you know, he's out in the woods and it's real quiet and there's the guy with the flashlight chasing him and the other one's on the roof the whole time with Mia Sara and all. It is really competently done, this movie. There is a lot of silly bits to it, like you said, especially with, like, the rocket car and the one, of course, pervert guy who's like the programmer or whatever. Like, it's stupid and cheesy, unnecessary. And then the way the thugs all dress and look is just hilarious to me. Where in, 2004, you could tell if it was a bad guy if he had a belt around his fucking leather jacket with shoulder pads and a mullet and steel plates on his shoes for some reason. But it's still a really sort of... There's a lot of tense moments. There's a lot of exciting moments. And it is pretty competently acted kind of all around. Like, Van Damme is not terrible in this movie. Mia Sara is probably the most wasted character in the movie, but even she's decent in it.
Oh, it's such a well-cast movie, with especially you got people like Bruce McGill as the commander, who's always great. One of the great character actors. And especially, like, just how he plays off of Jean-Claude, which is just like, oh, hey, I think this was the thing where I say, like, oh, I'm losing my mind. You're like, what? No, not you. Like, shit like that back and forth, or even later on, she's like, you're walking. It's like, yeah, I've been doing that since I was 2, I believe. Is that surprising to you?
I have your wife's casserole 100 times. Always too much salt. You say you're my friend? Why the hell are you making me do this? Yeah, it's a good little sci-fi action movie, man, that I think unfairly got lost due to starring Jean-Claude Van Damme. I mean, because a lot of people didn't realize this was from a comic book. So it's not the comic book sort of connection because, comic book movies in the early 90s were all failures. I think it's basically because it stars Van Damme that people don't give it a chance.
Right, and this was sort of like his last hurrah of sorts, right before it started really going down for him, pretty much. What would you say was the official, this is the point of no return for his stardom?
I mean, honestly, a lot of people would probably point to the one he did with Dennis Rodman. And I mean, obviously, of course, but I think it came just a little bit before that, man. I remember when Maximum Risk came out with Natasha Henstridge, and that was just, nobody gave a fuck. Nobody saw it. Nobody cared. And I remember that kind of being like Van Damme's done. And then he went off to do that stinker with Rodman, and then he did another one that's just so fucking bad. The Quest, like you mentioned before. Well, this was the last sort of big movie, I'd say, where that made a ton of money.
Right.
That he was in. Yeah, definitely. I think after this, people were just kind of done with him.
Yeah, and it's a bummer that I guess it kind of got looped in with that, because there's plenty of fun sequences. Like you mentioned, the one that's in the warehouse, which is fun. Also, the one where they invade his apartment, I think is also very good with the henchman.
Great.
Yeah, where it actually has a practical use for the splits with him trying to avoid being electrocuted. That's pretty fun.
The movie has a really cool opening too.
Yes, with the whole Civil War thing.
The Civil War gold.
That's a really cool opening, but I will say a kind of disappointment because of that. It's just you tease us with, there's going to be more time travel to other places, and it's no, they kind of just travel back and forth from 1994 to 2004, which is still fun. But at the same time, if you open with the Civil War thing, that sets up an expectation. Is Jean-Claude going to be in a gladiator tournament? Is he going to fight dinosaurs?
Holy shit, could you imagine?
Believe me, I would love that if or he just fucking roundhouse kicks a fucking caveman or some shit. I would be down for that. But at the same time, this is still, like I mentioned, fun. I think also a big credit with that opening to establish the time travel rules with Scott Lawrence, another great character actor, who comes in when they're introducing time travel. That's a dumb idea. Yeah, you know what? It might sound dumb, but actually it's a really good way to get money. And it's well, I mean, can we really mess with that? What's going to happen? It's what if someone else discovers time travel in some other country, goes back to 1945 and gets the idea for the atom bomb from us? What do you think's going to happen then? And I think that's, this is once again, it's firmly, very succinctly and firmly establishing, these are the rules, this is what might happen, thus we need time cops.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward right off the bat. Hey, guess what? Somebody tried an Iranian arms deal and tried to pay with Civil War gold. So we know it's happening. Mm-hmm. We know it for a fact. It's real. We have to police it right away. We have to be, it's sort of funny, because it's, America, but we have to be the authority on this. And if this were to actually happen, if somebody figured out how to do this, that is 100% how it would be. We would be we're going to be the authority on it. We are the only people who can have the technology and blah, blah, blah.
But I also at the same time, they're able to make fun of that idea, particularly with the bit where Bruce McGill's going around establishing, we have spared every single expense. No comfort, no nothing. And it's just it's so sterile. It's a really clever way of getting around the fact that it's only a $27 million budget movie for such a big concept. It's just it's a government facility that would only have the bare necessities for it.
Right. And I do like the whole, like you said, you brought up the stockbroker scene. Another really cool idea. Really cool the way it's done. Great action bit there, too, where he just kicks the living shit out of those two thug guys. And, oh, God, our favorite. Now, let's be honest. We both laughed. Oh, tomorrow might have been a brighter day.
So, yes. Yeah. Just oh, hey, that may go on. Just he's going that far with it. It's, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Get the fuck out of here, dude.
Well, even that's a really that's a great dark joke to start off with, where people are jumping off. It's just oh my god, this is terrible. It's just shit happens, and then the time traveler guy just goes through,
and then comes back. Oh, tomorrow might have been a brighter day. It's great. It's so fucking funny.
But I even also how even before the big action set piece takes place in the middle of that counting room, how that guy is even look, dude, I can't go back because they'll know I'm gonna go back, and then he'll erase my parents from ever existing and shit like that. It's just it's a really, once again, clever way of setting up the stakes, which is a back and forth dialogue that feels natural.
Yeah, just leave me here, dude. I won't do anything else. Just leave me fucking here. They'll come and maybe kill me here, or I have to die here. It's sort of idea, and it's really fucked up.
Credit, by the way, to Jason Scombing is that actor. who's very good.
Yeah, and he's pretty good at
Yes.
it too. But yeah, I agree. It's a really cool idea. Sets, like you said, the stakes up pretty quickly. Like the rules, the stakes, everything. Like this is fucking serious, and there's only one man who can stop it. Max Walker. It has to be 2 Van Dams. One's not enough.
Right, and I do like how even Van Damme, just like in his body language, really establishes the difference between those characters. Like, you didn't technically need the mullet. You can see that, like, the future one is a lot more forlorn and has a lot more sort of like this devil may care kind of attitude. Like, even I love the bit when he's talking to Gloria Rubin, and it's just like, how do you when you're traveling in time, focus on? It's just like, not swallowing my tongue. And so, like, just like, he doesn't give a shit. Which I will say, I like the Gloria Rubin character, at least initially, where it's just like, oh, she ends up making that twist, but she has a desperate reason. Maybe not a fan of the fact that she just kind of gets pushed off to the side as a character after that, where she just, like, gets murdered in the hospital and shit like that. I wish we had a bit more with her, because she's a really fun presence.
I agree. I mean, she tries to go toe-to-toe with Van Damme and shit. And that was fun, like, But, like you said, and then they just try to give her a redemption, like, right away. And you're like, no.
Well, it's not even that like they try and give her redemption. It's like, I'm willing to go on that arc if you actually go to it, as opposed to like, you know what, I'm gonna redeem myself. Dead.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. And I love that the nurse instantly thinks it's Van Damme that did it. Nobody saw those fucking 2 big freaks walk into her room and walk out. Like,
Someone knows
like,
something clearly.
Yeah, right. Blend in, man. Those guys.
And the giant boots and all that other shit. And even like I would say like with the Mia Sara, I agree that it's kind of like on paper a thinner role, but at the same time I really like the scenes with particularly her and older Van Damme talking about like the back and forth, just like, oh, you're from the future? How am I? And he just says like, just like this. Is like, that's the perfect line for that as well.
And I love that she's just balls out like, what, am I dead? Like,
Yep.
She's like, oh, fuck, wait, am I fucking dead? Like, it's, yeah, I agree. And they do have really good chemistry. And she's always a fun presence. I've always liked Mia Sara, even though I don't think she does much anymore. But, yeah, I've always like, since Ferris Bueller kind of had a soft spot for Mia Sara.
Yeah, I think she had to go back to Hugo Weaving and Liv Tyler amongst the elves.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a good point.
I believe she is
accurate.
elvish. Like, she kind of has that kind of immortal beauty as well, where she looks, oh, you look the same, pretty much at this point. But also, I agree with, like, I think we've talked about Peter Hyams so much. I love the way that he shoots some of these action sequences. I think particularly the staging of the final action sequence is so stunning, where it's so much of like, oh, hey, here's, like, young Jean-Claude having his back and forth with, like, people on, especially the roof. All the stuff on the roof is so fucking good in that final action sequence. But at the same time, older Van Damme is able to, like, take advantage of, like, oh, I lived this once before and I can, like, move around it and shit like that, all without them ever really seeing each other. I like how it's staged like that.
You can't tell me that there wasn't, like, a possibly, well, I'm sure there was, a studio note, like, well, we should make them team up and kung fu guys together. Like, it's Van Damme. Why aren't we doing this? And it could have been so easy to go that route, and I'm so glad they didn't.
Right. This is,
like,
I think it's also because, like, this is post the one where he does actually fight a version of himself, right? And he's also done it several times afterward. I think Jean-Claude, even more so than Schwarzenegger or Stallone or any of the other action stars, is the one who's fought himself the most.
I think at least 3 times, if I remembering correctly. Like, Double Impact, they were twins.
Right.
There's this one where he's in it as 2 different characters, and then there's a direct-to-DVD one called Replicant, where it's like an evil clone of him.
And there's one project we'll mention that has 3 Jean-Claude Van Dammes. That's really great. We'll mention it later. But no, yeah, still with Timecop, I can see why it kind of was sort of his poster child movie, because it feels at least the most like him kind of being a traditional action star. It still has some of his fun quirks, like particularly the opening scene of him at the mall with Mia Sara. And, like, hunting down that one dude who, like, steals the woman's purse and just, like, putting his foot. I was just like, what does it say? Wolverine, read between the lines. I should get the fuck out.
You know that purse? Doesn't look good on you. Like, what did he just say? What the fuck? He's a cop in DC? Who is this fucking guy? Like, no, yeah, absolutely. It's super fun. Super, super fun. And he does when he is the young Van Damme, even in just that scene, like you said, there's a clear distinction between the two. Like he's real sort of peppy and happy-go-lucky, and he's in love, like deep romantic love.
He
with
even
his
has more
wife,
proper
and
posture, even like his body language is very different.
his hair's all nice and clean cut. He's clean shaven. Like you're right. He's dressed nice. Like you said, he's got real good posture, stands straight up and everything. And then when you get to the older one, we're gonna have to shake him to see if he's awake. You know what I mean? Like, absolutely. He becomes so sort of jaded and just basically not, without being, the classic where now he's a drinker and blah blah blah. He looks like he's a drinker now.
Right, he looks a lot more forlorn, and I think it really helps to like really sell the ending bit as well, where he ends up doing that to Ron Silver, which we can't not mention. Ron Silver's demise in this is phenomenally mid-90s in terms of the CG used to make. Oh no, matter can't interact with matter. Oh no.
Yeah, same matter can't occupy the same space at the same time. Yeah, he, spoilers for anybody that see this, but he kicks the younger one to the older one, to the evil one, and they just turn into this giant veiny, like pasta sauce gelatinous goo, and there's just all these screams and and then they hit the ground and just disappear. It's so fucking funny. It is so bad when the flashlight hand goes through him. It is the most ridiculous thing I think I might have ever seen in my life.
But I also even love the lead up to it as well, with like Ron Silver thinking he's won and stuff like that. Just like, and then young Ron Silver comes in like, "You left me that message." I didn't leave you any message. One, I love that he apparently got fooled into thinking Jean-Claude Van Damme's accent for being the younger version of him, I guess. And two, also just the way that older Ron Silver reacts, just like, "Oh great. Thanks a lot. You turned a perfectly simple murder into a clusterfuck."
Yeah, right, basically. Now we are completely fucked. Thank you.
And of course, Jean-Claude's reaction, like the diss track reply to the Broadway thing, just like, "I'm still kicking it. I must be on Broadway."
Oh, yeah.
It's so good.
It's so dumb. And I love the sort of end bit where the sort of disheveled Walker, home in this car that, what kind of fucking car are these things?
It looks totally like the car you would buy for the Timecop action figure set.
Absolutely. It looks like a G.I. Joe vehicle. It goes back and the house is still there. Like they must have rebuilt the entire house. And his son comes out and he's like, "Oh, you're home." Now, happy ending, sure. But now this poor bastard has to make up for 10 years of not knowing any of this and try to just, "I'm a dad now." like what the fuck, dude? That's terrifying.
Or also having to live with all of the pain that he's had previously and having just readjusted, like, "Oh, that's not your reality anymore."
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. Jeez, I didn't even think of it that way. Good lord. Yeah, what a nightmare.
The existential dread of Timecop. But still, it's a pretty fun movie overall. I really liked it. We'll spin this off into final thoughts here. I would say it is probably, it's neck and neck with another Peter Hyams movie for like top tier Jean-Claude for me. I think it's because I think it has the right perfect balance of 90s era blockbuster with like the sillier logic, but at the same time a real dedication to being as like quick and fast as possible, and like we mentioned, extremely well cast. And even Jean-Claude shows a bit more range than some of his action movies did. Some of the stuff you'd see later when he gets a bit more introspective in his career, I think is initially coming off here. And yeah, so I get why it's one of his best, and I would agree. I think it is one of his better films. And Adam, I guess you would concur with all that.
Basically word for word with everything you said. I just think it's fun. Like I said, I don't think you got an unfair shake because it is a Van Damme movie. But if you haven't seen it and you're into, quirky sci-fi action that you got to suspend disbelief but still have fun time, then this probably be the movie for you.
We're going into another movie that also might be for you, as it should be for anyone. But first, here's a promo for an ESO show you can queue up right after ours.
Check out what's been going on with the Pop Culture Cosmos Show and the PCC Multiverse. I would say that E3 maybe isn't the event that it once was, but everybody still plans their event around the E3 schedule.
Steven Spielberg could throw out a gum commercial and we'd all watch it because it's Steven Spielberg.
Dragon Age 4 is carrying, I think, the future of BioWare on its shoulders.
That's the Pop Culture Cosmos Show.
And the PCC Multiverse.
Catch our shows on Worldwide Radio 7 days a week and right here on the ESO Network.
And now let's get into our second feature here, Lionheart.
They think they can get away with murder.
This is gasoline.
But they didn't count on one thing.
Does he have any other relatives?
He's trained to fight for his life. Now, he's fighting for revenge. They think it's a game.
Hey, I got 3-1 against Lionheart.
He's playing for keeps. The rules are simple.
There's no rules.
It's going to be simple.
Van Damme is Lionheart.
So Lionheart came out January 11th, 1991, from co-writer/director Sheldon Lettich, though we should mention that Jean-Claude Van Damme is also a co-screenwriter along with S.N. Warren. And this is from 1991, so this is a bit early. This is post, at least, Bloodsport and Kickboxer, which were sort of the big ones that got Jean-Claude on the scene. So this is sort of like one of them in the wake of that. And actually, Leach was one of the co-writers of Bloodsport. And there's a lot to this movie. I want to at least preface it by saying this much, that there's a quote I found from Sheldon Lettich that I think explains so much about this movie, where he says, quote, "Lionheart was a defining film for Van Damme because I did not shy away from giving him considerable amounts of dialogue and character development throughout the film. I trusted him to pull this off, whereas before nobody else believed he could do much more than just deliver fancy kicks and simple one-liners. Lionheart was the first movie to demonstrate that Van Damme was more than just a flash-in-the-pan karate guy who would never rise above simplistic low-budget karate films." And Adam, does that not sum up the beauty of Lionheart?
1,000%, man. I mean, 10,000%. You know, the thing is, it's so funny. Van Damme's like first 3 big movies, you named them already: Kickboxer, Bloodsport, and Lionheart. They're all basically the same idea, you know, where it's Van Damme, fish out of water, gets into a fighting tournament in some way, and then has, you know, a helpful, down on his luck partner/manager with him, which in this case, what the fuck? But this movie's fucking weird, dude.
What? No. What?
Weird movie, man. The thing with Van Damme is, what really does set him apart from maybe some of the other action stars we had talked about earlier, especially like a Schwarzenegger or things like that, is Van Damme really wanted to be in control of his own image. And as far as like writing and doing that action choreography himself and directing and all that stuff. And, you know, when I was a kid, Van Damme was just another one of those guys. He was just another one of those 80s action stars, man. He was, you know, the stereotypical white action star. And as a kid, I didn't, you know, really place that, oh, he's also a foreigner. So, you know, because you don't think about that when you're 5, 6, 7 years old, really.
And you're just like, he talks funny.
Right. He's got a silly voice. Wow, crazy. Is he from France or New Orleans or Quebec or wherever the fuck they say he's from in all these movies? Sometimes just straight up New York, which you're like, no. But the thing is, I never really understood it, but I always knew there was something different just about the tone even of Van Damme movies. And then as I get older, I start to realize it's the foreign sensibility trying to write American action film. And that's where, you know, a lot of the weird dialogue choices, a lot of the weird stereotypical sort of racist tinged moments, the sexual attitude in the movies, the sort of way he interacts with children in all the movies, it's so bizarre and so weird for an American audience. And as a kid, I was never able to really identify that. Like I said, I just knew they were just different. There was something different about it. Now, as I get older, I notice it, and it almost makes me appreciate the movies more that they were even competent enough to have a fan base and make him famous and stuff like that. Because all of those movies, especially the three we just named, are fucking bizarre, man. They are weird, weird movies, and yet they made him a huge, huge star. And it's crazy to me. I mean, that is such a success story. And I don't think he gets enough credit for that. I really, really don't.
I had assumed that Sheldon Lettich was like some kind of like Belgian director or something he brought over for this. But what's fascinating is he is like born and bred in the USA. He was like in the Marines and stuff like that. So it's almost like having like the story fed through Jean-Claude and him. It's like this movie feels like a weird game of telephone. Where like one person tries to translate what the culture is, and the other person is trying to translate what his version of it is, and then it gets looped around, and just so much feels like it gets lost in translation. But it works in the same way I think a lot of the movies we love talking about, from especially like So Bad They're Good foreign filmmakers who come over to the States and want to make the big Hollywood American movie. Like Lionheart epitomizes that, I think, even more than the other two movies like Bloodsport or Kickboxer, which have some of those charms. But I think the thing that makes Lionheart just even more weirder is it feels scrappier. I think because it feels like it's the smaller budget movie, and it's tremendous to see like so much gumption go through this weird premise where basically, for this particular movie, despite being, I agree, very similar to the other two movies beforehand, the particular premise for this one is Jean-Claude Van Damme is in the French Foreign Legion, and he's being abused by his higher-ups when he finds out that his brother has been horribly maimed over in LA. And so he ends up escaping from the French Foreign Legion and hopping on a boat and getting to LA, where he ends up, he gets to New York initially, right? And then they go to LA, right?
Correct.
Right, because that's where he meets Joshua, his trainer, Harrison Page, in, like you mentioned, a very stereotypical sort of jive-talking black person role that's not uncommon, because also in Kickboxer. It's so weird. We'll talk about him more in a second. But then they go to L.A., where he ends up finding out that his brother has just passed, and he tries to take care of his niece and his brother's wife while he's over there. And he gets caught up in a fighting ring that's run by this woman, Deborah Renard, as Cynthia. Runs this like fight club, basically, ring that she enlists him into. And just, there's so many weird fucking details about this movie that just, they're like, make you constantly question reality at any point.
Well, the whole point of her character is that she wants to fucking just bang him so bad.
Yes.
She is so hungry for Van Damme. And he just obviously wants nothing to do with it, which is hilarious every time he rejects her, how mad she gets. It's like, well, what did you think was going to happen? You've been trying all the time. You literally just walked into him on the dressing room and grabbed his junk. And you expect him to be like, all right, fine, this time we'll go for
it. And especially like, there's a sequence where like he's like so exhausted and she like puts him in a room. And then it like cuts to him waking up in the morning. She's like, my clothes aren't done. What's happening? And she comes and she's like, oh, I slipped you out of those, and I was just watching over you this whole time. Just like, oh, so you like maybe sexually assaulted him in his sleep? What's going on?
Yeah, and burned his clothes.
That's right.
Yeah, he burned.
I mean, to be sure, so we could see the Jean-Claude ass shot, which happens many times in these movies.
Oh, it's like, it's a given. It has to. And then I love Brian Thompson as sort of her stooge. Like, he's fantastic in it. But I gotta talk about Joshua, like, now.
Of course, yes.
Like, now.
Yes.
If I don't, it's gonna kill me.
Let's do it now.
So, okay. First of all, Joshua is like 70s jive, like you would expect in like Shaft or something like that, how they talk. Like 1,000%. He's from that era. You know, I'm not gonna do the voice like no.
Yep, you shouldn't. I'm insisting that you don't.
No, I won't. But just the way he calls people like jive turkey and stuff, and like it's like, what the fuck is this? Then one of my favorite things ever is when they go to use a payphone, and a gang that is in this shitty rundown van in this shitty, literally bum town, as Joshua sort of refers it to, comes out and starts to harass them because, you know, you got to pay to use their phone. And what is his phone not good enough? And the way these guys are dressed is the most inexplicable gang attire I might have ever seen in a movie. And I'm talking, I've seen The Warriors 100 times. These guys, like trench coats with no shirts on, but the sleeves are rolled up, and they're also wearing fingerless gloves. And like I said, they're all hanging out in a van.
They look like they would be like the gang that would encounter MC Hammer if he ever did like a bad ripoff.
Yeah, that's very fair. That's really, really accurate. Okay, so Joshua, one thing Joshua likes to do in this movie is eat.
Yes, he does.
There's a scene where he's eating a burrito. There's a scene where he's eating a sandwich. But Joshua, as well as all the other side characters in this movie, really love Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Right, which the thing is, the biggest thing I love is that there's this whole sequence where like he goes up to see Jean-Claude, sees his young niece and then the wife, and there's like a big dramatic scene of them. So I'm like, look, you can't come closer to me. You introduced him to drugs. That's why he's dead. Like I don't want you to ever see my daughter again. And then it cuts to Joshua outside waiting for him, and he has just like a bucket of KFC in his fucking hands.
Just a bucket of chicken, dude. And he's just sitting there eating the chicken. Like, where did he go to get that fast? And then the guys from the French Foreign Legion who are looking for him, it shows them several times. They're staked out across from Van Damme's sister-in-law's apartment. And clearly they haven't left in days because they're still wearing the same clothes. They're sleeping in shifts. Yet they have a bunch of Kentucky Fried Chicken containers all around them.
Just unkempt hotel room.
There's so much chicken in this room. Did they pay? They had to have paid either Kentucky Fried Chicken to use it, or they had to have paid them to use it. They had to have, because it's blatant product placement.
Or at least gotten some sign off, just like, sure, whatever, you can do that. And in which case, if the KFC saw this movie, there's like, yeah, sure, this is fine, no problem. It's just like, so many questions.
KFC marketing. What the fuck? And then also to talk about how weird this movie is. So he eventually does decide to hook up with Cynthia. Not like sexually, but hook up with her and let her sort of run his career so he can make money to set up this fake insurance fund that he's giving his sister-in-law money. I don't know. It makes no sense.
Right after a sequence where he goes around moping with the amazingly over-the-top score in this movie that we need to talk about, where sometimes it's what you would usually expect from a Jean-Claude movie, where it's like heavy saxophone or like some 80s like over-the-top songs. But then, especially early on in the movie, it plays like we're watching like a beautiful sweeping epic. Like, is this Once Upon a Time in America? Which is like him walking the streets of New York or shit like that.
And it's the same song over and over. But okay, so he gets involved in these underground fights, which by underground is very loosely. These are very, very out in the open. They do this fight in this like parking garage or a warehouse or whatever. All the cars park in a circle and shine their headlights. And the opponent gets there, and it's a Scotsman, right?
Yes.
And you know how you know it's a Scotsman? Because he's wearing a kilt and the beret.
And you hear bagpipes on the soundtrack.
Oh, there's bagpipes for sure. For sure. Just like when he's in, I'm guessing it's L.A., but it looks like it's Florida, and he fights the guy in the pool. And it's a capoeira guy, and you know, because there's like island music playing.
Yep, steel drums and everything, baby.
Steel drums and everything, man. It is just such a bizarre movie, dude. Like, why does this movie work? Some would say it doesn't, and they're probably right. But it's so like, I can't not watch Lionheart anytime it's on. I don't know what it is.
I think it has a bit more sincerity, because we also recently watched like a kickboxer. I think what separates this from a kickboxer, which is still fun, is that like Lionheart just completely spits at the idea that it is at all like a dumb low budget action movie. It's just like, no, this is high art. We are talking about a horrible tragedy of this man who has lost his brother and is only fighting in order to provide for his limited family that he has left. It has such a sincerity to it that makes it so fucking hilarious with how sincere it is. Even scenes where like he's talking to his niece, who is played by Ashley Johnson, who some of you might know from like she's the waitress in the first Avengers movie, and she also plays Ellie in The Last of Us, and she's an adorable little girl. She's just like, hi, I'm 5, my name's Nicole, and all this other shit. So you're just fully invested in the drama the entire time, as the drama gets so fucking silly, with particularly the big sort of climactic battle that he has with the massive, huge dude, which I just love the fact also that the way that that character's introduced, the evil villain, is that he comes out literally with a white cat. That's his, like, one emotional connection is this white cat who, right before even the fight starts, he goes over to the ring and just pets the white cat.
Don't forget about his fucking sideburns, too. Good lord.
I just thought those were his cheeks at a certain point. It's like, these can't be sideburns. These are just actual flesh.
Yeah, they really want you to care. Like, in this movie, they really want you to, like, be down with Leon's, like, emotional plight. I mean, they are trying to beat you over the head with it, especially, like, him and Joshua's relationship where, you know, wrong bet. It's so dumb.
Oh, no, especially, like, the lead up to, like, right before the fight where he's just like, I placed a bet on myself. I cleared out my bank account. And Josh was like, damn it. Lionheart, you've got a lot of heart. You got the strength of a lion. Literal dialogue from that scene.
100%. Let's not forget, real quick, I'm not going to do the voice either, but my favorite doctor maybe ever in a movie. The best doctor ever. You should take karate lessons. What the fuck?
Dude who feels like, oh, are you a Cheech Marin stand-in mech?
Yeah,
hey man, you gotta like stay in bed for a week. You have a crushed rib cage. Just like, here's $100 to make sure you have to tell anybody. Oh man, I'll definitely take this. It's just
$100, sure, man. I ain't gonna tell nobody. $100, no problem, dude.
It's just like, is this like the hospital run by Dr. Nick Riviera from The Simpsons? Because this is the only way where this would work as a doctor.
1,000, and dude, he's wearing a lab coat with like a Jimi Hendrix shirt on underneath it. Like, what the fuck is this? He's such a hip doctor. But then again, that's just some of the other things. These fucking characters in this movie. That's part of the reason I love it too. Because these people, even in Van Damme's other movies, these people don't exist. They can't exist except in the world of Lionheart.
In the world translated from an American director and a Belgian star/co-writer trying to co-write a script together. That feels like, oh, this is authentic American.
I was in the Marines, so I know about the military. Okay, I want to be in the French Foreign Legion stationed in Africa.
Sure. Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Sure. All right. And that's what we're going with. Great. I want to have a weird sexual relationship with every female character in this movie. All right. It's just so fucking dumb.
And there's even just weird details. Like, there's a point where Jean-Claude, like, in the big montage before he decides to fight, is following around, like, his niece and his sister-in-law, like, taking her to school. And he's, like, looking over from the other side of the street, just like, oh no, this is what I'm missing out on my family. And in between the two of them is, like, the police arresting, like, a bunch of people. Just
bunch of people, like 8 in the morning.
Why is that there? That's so distracting.
Hands behind their heads with the guns out and everything. Like, what the fuck is happening here? And I also love that Van Damme's idea of a fucking disguise as a hood that's on only half of his head.
Yes.
Like, good disguise.
And to also contrast, just like between like a Peter Hyams who directed the last movie so efficiently, this movie, with the way that all the fight sequences are constructed, is so fascinating, where we kind of mentioned this earlier. The idea that there are so many times where Jean-Claude hits a person or kicks a person, and we have to edit to 500 different angles of that one kick and or punch.
Stop. I mean, to the point, I swear to God, I almost get nauseous at some of it. Because it's just boom, 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 from different angle, different angle, different angle, different angle, different angle, different angle, same angle, different angle, different angle, same angle. And it's just, what the fuck what is happening here? It is absolutely obnoxious in its execution.
But I think that's part of the charm, because it's just like they want to show off how good Jean-Claude is. So it's like, of course we have to have 6 different cameras on this. Of course we do. We have to capture the moment from every single possible angle that could be conceived of. It's so fucking hysterical every time that shit happens, because it's coming from this place of sincerity of like, we want to show people a good time. And you know what, Adam? They succeeded, because I think we both had such a good time.
It was so fun. The thing is, you tasked me with coming up with the Van Damme movies to watch, and I knew this was one that I'm like, oh, we got to watch Lionheart. Thomas is not going to know what the hell this is.
Oh, no, and I was, like, so baffled the whole time. Like, what? That's me most of this, like, 100-minute running time. All the way from, like, the early moments when his brother is burned alive. It's like, this is what we call gasoline, to the ending, which I love how, like, after all this, the great Academy Award attempted winning thing of Jean-Claude being like, I'm sorry, but you and your mommy have to go without me. And Ashley John's like, no, you can't leave. And the French Foreign Legion guy's just like, oh man, we feel so bad. I can't believe we're taking this man away.
I know, they drive half a block down the road.
Right.
Get out.
Get out. I joked to Adam when we watched, it's just like the only thing missing from this is them to say, do you love them? Then go to them. And he runs the other way back to his little family he's created.
I know. It is the best. And also, shout out to that Lawrence Bender cameo.
Yes. Okay. There's the second fight that happens is like in the middle of this like parking garage that's where Cynthia ends up getting the eye of Lionheart first is introduced to him, and like there's just a very quick thing where like he immediately like the big guy comes after he murders like some dude. He's just like, I can't wait to beat up this French guy. And then Jean-Claude like does the splits down, just punches that dude in the crotch, and immediately falls over. And the big tough guy who's just like, hey, what the fuck, man? I bet a lot of money on that guy. And Jean-Claude gets in his face.
Kick this fucking guy's ass.
Right.
Yeah.
The guy who he gets in the face of is multiple Academy Award nominated producer Lawrence Bender, who produced like the first several Quentin Tarantino movies up to Inglourious Bastards.
I know. What the fuck? Why is Lawrence Bender in this movie?
I think he was like he was a failed actor prior to becoming a producer. I think like the next year he produces Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah, legitimately.
Which is crazy. Ben, we could go on forever about Lionheart, but I think we have to start wrapping. But is there anything you want to add before we start doing final thoughts, though? Anything we missed?
The only thing I can think of is, once Van Damme starts to kick Attila's, because that's the main bad guy's name, by the way, Attila. Once he starts to kick Attila's ass, I love that he realizes Attila's weakness is spin kicking a pointing finger away from him. It is the best shot ever. And Van Damme kicks it, and you would have think this guy just took a shotgun blast to the chest. Oh, it's one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life.
Well, wait, also, a shout out to like that, like during that final climactic battle, there's a whole point where for no reason the entire crowd starts doing a slow clap.
Yeah, initiated by one of the French Foreign Legion guys.
Yes.
So wrap your head around that one. I think we pretty much said it all. I think this movie is batshit crazy, but also just buckets of fun, dude.
KFC buckets of chicken of fun?
KFC buckets of fun.
I'm guessing those are your final thoughts then.
Yeah, what the fuck else can you say about this movie?
Well, I'll briefly just say, I agree with everything you said. I think Lionheart is so much fun. It's one of those ones with the bad movies where we've talked so much about like, oh, so bad they're good, like fun movies that we would recommend despite them being bad, or obviously the other various versions of bad. This is one of the ones that I would technically have to classify as a bad movie, but I have so much fun. I'm just like, but is it though? Is it?
I know.
It's one of those just like, I don't think like the movie's aiming for much higher than what I enjoy it for, which is to say a cheap but very sincere, heartfelt, dumbass movie. It is truly Lionheart felt in every single capacity.
After we watched it, we had a little mini competition of who was going to use it in their choices.
We did.
Whether it was going to be one of our good choices or one of your bad choices. And we were both kind of okay where it might land.
That's true, yes. But at the same time, it's worth discussing for so many things we said. Also, another shout out to a moment in the lead up to the payphone thing you were talking about. There's a moment where like they're dropped off from the limo, and him and Joshua are walking down the street. Jean-Claude's just like, I mean, we have so much money. Like, why don't we just, do something? Like, hey, man, you can't talk about us having $10,000 out loud, saying it much louder than Jean-Claude even said. It's like, you're the one that mentioned the specific amount of money that we had.
Shut the fuck up, man.
Listen to your own advice. Oh, good lord. But no, yeah, there's so much else we can talk about. The only thing else we can say, though, is definitely watch Lionheart. Watch it. It's so fucking
Watch
fun.
it.
But before we get into our next segment, Adam, it's time we played a little message from the ESO crew that we fully endorse.
Welcome to Dr. Geek's Laboratory.
Hello everyone, Dr. Geek here with a shout out to all the scientists who worked tirelessly to bring a COVID-19 vaccine into reality. Let's face it, creating something of this magnitude is a miracle worthy of Dr. McCoy himself. And now, Dr. Geek needs you to do your part. Remember, each shot is one small step back to normal, one giant leap to putting the pandemic behind us. We can do this. For more information, visit vaccines.gov to find your nearest provider.
Well, and now it is time for us to do our double redo, where every week, along with the two features we discuss, Am and I talk about 2 good and 2 bad movies related to the topic each as a sort of recommendations, and we recommend you avoid. In terms of, in this case, the topic of Jean-Claude Van Damme. And I'll be going first with my choices here. And I'm actually going to do something we haven't, we usually do the 2 good and the 2 bad ones. I want to start with the 2 bad ones because I have an extended thing about one of my good choices. So I'll save that one for last. The 2 bad ones I'll briefly shout out, as it were, that I have seen as a novice in particular, are 2 of his sort of bigger American productions. The more recent one is Expendables 2. Which I think is quite bad, as like even with the first Expendables, it's kind of like a major disappointment. I remember being so excited for that one, and it's just like, oh, this, I think, doesn't want to like really, it treats itself too seriously despite also being ridiculous. It's weird how that movie feels. And then Expendables 2, I think, goes in the weird other direction of being way too jokey in a way that feels like this is just like a masturbatory affair with like, it's mostly not with Jean-Claude. I will say, I don't think Jean-Claude's the problem with this movie. He does seem kind of bored, but at the same time, the one kind of interesting fight scene is between him and Stallone. I think it's like one of the few bright moments of the movie. But it's hard to kind of give a shit after. I think that is what follows the really dumb cavalcade of like everybody trading off catchphrases, like Arnold Schwarzenegger says like yippee-ki-yay and all this other bullshit. That's really upsetting. And also, probably my least favorite moment in any of these fucking movies, where they get Chuck Norris to come in and do Chuck Norris jokes in the middle of this fucking Expendables movie. It's so fucking just cringy and shitty on every level. And then the older bad movie, one where I would argue a lot of sort of his issues behind the scenes really came about, is the 1994 Street Fighter, which isn't the worst Street Fighter movie. We talked about that on the show previously with Legend of Chun-Li, but unfortunately, Street Fighter from 1994 isn't much better. The reasonings are not related to Van Damme in this case. It's because of the late, great Raul Julia in his final performance as M. Bison going so for broke in every scene, which is game over and shit like that. So good. But Jean-Claude is definitely in a stage where, like, I know Capcom, who co-produced the movie and had like a lot of final say, really wanted Jean-Claude to play the Guile character, and you can tell he does not give a single fuck. And apparently there's a lot of weird behind the scenes stuff with him just like being very egocentric and like very much a like, I'm the star here and you all are like beneath me, you're all shitty, because he was on a lot of coke, and you can really feel it on the screen. It results in a really bad little action movie. And then my 2 good ones, one we kind of teased before, is the second collaboration between Van Damme and Peter Hyams, which is Sudden Death, which came out in 1995, and is a very clear Die Hard ripoff. It's basically Jean-Claude plays a retired fireman who has a lot of like PTSD from a big cave-in that happened in his career in the opening, and so now he's a fire marshal, but really more like a janitor of sorts at this hockey stadium, and he brings his kids, because he's a divorced parent, over to like the big hockey game over in Pittsburgh. And while they're there, it turns out that a bunch of terrorists have occupied the big VIP box because the vice president is there. And it's a lot of fun in terms of, like, I would argue it's upper echelon Die Hard ripoff. It's very close to something like a Speed for me, in terms of the Die Hard in a blank movies that came out around this time. In this case, in a hockey stadium. It's very well shot. There's a lot of fun action beats, particularly one in which Jean-Claude beats the shit out of one of the terrorists inside a Penguins mascot outfit in the kitchen. That's really dope and really enjoyable. But the big thing is, even though Jean-Claude's great, the MVP of the movie is Powers Booth as the version of Hans Gruber here, who is just eating so much scenery and stealing all of the movie, and is so fucking good. So just like, yeah, I'm evil, I don't give a shit. Like, that's his attitude the whole time. It's so goddamn good, and it's worth watching this movie for sure. Just like that performance alone is so damn good. But the other good one I want to talk about is one that I did really like, but I had a reservation with, at least the version that's available. I'm talking about JCVD, which is one of the more introspective recent ones that came out, where Jean-Claude plays a version of himself who is in dire straits and is in a big custody battle over his kid with his most recent wife. And so He ends up trying to go to a bank so he can pay off his agent and also get some money to like transfer over so he doesn't end up losing his lawyer. And while he's at this bank in Brussels, his hometown, there ends up being a hostage situation. So he ends up being kidnapped along with everybody else. And it's a very introspective look because it's very much Jean-Claude has action moments, but he seems tired and out of it. And just he really embraces being washed up in this and has a phenomenal monologue where he just talks directly to the camera, just removes any sort of shed that like, oh, this isn't like a fun action romp of sorts, and just gives a phenomenal performance. But I will say, my big problem with at least the version available in the States is it is only available in the English dub. And the movie is, I would say, 80% in French. There's a few points where he actually speaks English. And we've done a bad impression of him throughout this whole episode, like his specific brand of doing, like, speaking English. The version that is available is maybe one of the worst dubs I've ever heard. And it's very clear that they didn't get Jean-Claude to do the dub, because there are points where he'll speak in his very typical, like, accent that's so distinctive from all these movies. And then we'll cut to the dub over, and it's some other actor, and it is massively distracting. It is just like such a bummer, especially when he's delivering such a great performance, that this is the only real version available in the States. And it's a big thing where like the whole time I was just like searching, like, can I watch a French version with subtitles? Like, this is one of those cases where I don't always mind dubs, but this is a clear case of like, if I ever watch this movie again, it will not be the dubbed version. And hopefully sites like Amazon Prime and shit like that will have that version available, because that's, watching the clip of the monologue alone in his French dialect with the subtitles is a vast improvement over that really bad dub.
I mean, yeah, I agree with all your choices for sure. And I second Sudden Death as being definitely not only top tier Van Damme, but one of the best Die Hard ripoffs ever. And it is just a masterful villain performance from Powers Booth. He's so fucking good in it. Everything he does in it works. And yeah, JCVD, I used to own it when I had physical media. And I remember having that problem too the first time I watched it with the dub, to the point where it was almost hard to watch. But the DVD I had did have the original French track. And so I switched to that. And yeah, it made a world of difference. And I mean a complete world of difference. It took a movie that might have gotten like a 2.5, to easily a 3.5. A whole point up with the subtitles. The less to say about Street Fighter, I mean, the better. That's a terrible, terrible film. And I completely agree with Expendables 2 as well. The first one, I'd argue, is very cheesy and silly and just really sort of meathead dumb action. But the second one takes it to a whole nother level, and it really suffers for it. To the point where then you get the awful third one, and they still talk about they're going to do a fourth, and I just really hope they don't.
Also, just a brief shout out with JCVD. The opening shot that's like one take is also phenomenal.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
And then I want to get into mine real quick because I know we both have something else we want to discuss.
Yes.
I'm going to start off with my bad picks as well, because I don't really have much to say about them, just other than that they're terrible. My first bad pick is Knockoff, which Knockoff, it's about the fashion industry, first of all, about knockoffs in fashion. And they try so hard in this movie to make Van Damme fight like a Jackie Chan, where he's using everything in his environment, car doors, seatbelts, constantly. And it doesn't work for him. It looks so phony and so overtly choreographed. And I mean, if you can't watch a martial arts movie and at least enjoy the martial arts, then the rest of the movie is going to be terrible. And this is 1,000% that. It is a terrible, terrible film. And then one of my least favorites of his too is one that he did a little earlier in his career, Nowhere to Run. He's a convict that hides out at this farmhouse, and the mom, she's a single mother, and it's Rosanna Arquette. And if you want to talk about two people having the least amount of chemistry on screen, they're just damn near right there. The only saving grace for Nowhere to Run is a very over-the-top Ted Levine as the bad guy. But other than that, I mean, it is just a shit fest of a movie. It is so bad. Such weird sexual talk between the mother and the kids about Van Damme. Like, it's really bizarre. And then for my good ones, I have actually, which I believe now would be the fourth sequel to Universal Soldier. It's Universal Soldier Day of Reckoning. What they did is they sort of handed the reins over to Scott Adkins, who's a very capable martial artist and fighter, and actually plays Van Damme's right-hand man in Expendables 2. And Van Damme is the same character he was in the first one, but he's become like a cult leader for all the other Universal Soldiers to follow and things like that. And it's really bizarre, man. He's really good as this sort of quiet villain. He's scary, like he paints his face half different colors and shit. Like it's really, really weird. Great one-shot action scenes in this. It's super fun. Is it great? No, but it's really good action and a really interesting Van Damme performance. And then my other one, it's kind of a hard one. Like, I want it to be Kickboxer so bad. I love Kickboxer, but after rewatching it recently, with you actually, there's a whole sexual assault rape subplot that really derails any of the fun you're having anytime it's sort of mentioned, because it's handled really disgustingly, as obviously as rape should be. But it's just it serves no purpose.
But in a cheap way for this particular movie.
Yeah, to make a bad guy even more evil.
Yeah.
Like, he's a pretty bad guy. It's not necessary to go that far. But for the good and the fun stuff that's in there is a lot of it. So I'd argue it's still a pretty enjoyable movie, especially for an early Van Damme. It's just that the whole rape subplot is really unnecessary.
Well, and also the look of that villain as well, who is supposed to be like a Thai sort of like villainous character, but is played by another Belgian actor in Yellowface.
Yeah, Michel Kesey, who actually plays one of the French Foreign Legion guys in Lionheart. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty bad. But again, there's the fun that is in this movie. There is a lot of it to be had. So those would be mine.
I mean, yeah, the only one of those I've seen is Kickboxer. And I mean, I will say with Kickboxer, that one has all those problems that we mentioned. I do agree with them. But at the same time, it has so much of like the same kind of like fun elements that we're talking about. Particularly with, there are points where Jean-Claude Van Damme hears ghosts when he's training out in like abandoned temples. But also, it would be most notable for any of you all who probably know Van Damme mostly as the guy who dances in those GIFs. That's where this comes from, and that sequence is just as great as you want it to be.
His muscle, like, strap shirt has so many different fastening apparatuses to it that is completely unnecessary.
And a fucking half zipper at the front. It's just like, what, guys? Yep. It's too much with this fucking shirt. And I know I've heard a lot of good things about at least the more recent Universal Soldier movies, and that we did also watch Universal Soldier, and that one is so messy where like the first half of it is like dumb in a way that's aggravating, and then it gets fun in the second half. So I'd be curious to see, especially because I know both the one that you brought up, Day of Reckoning, and also Regeneration, were both made by John Himes, who is the son of Peter Himes, and also Peter did the cinematography for his son for at least their Regeneration.
Yeah, and it's obvious.
Mm-hmm.
It's obvious. It's a pretty slick-looking movie. There's not a lot of fun in them, I'll tell you that. It's not a fun action movie. It's a straight-up, like, violent action movie.
Mm-hmm. But before we get out of the redo, we don't usually do this, but we both need to sincerely recommend another thing that's not even a movie. Because I watched this in prep for this show as well, and I'm stunned by how good it is. In 2017, Jean-Claude Van Damme did a streaming series for Amazon called Jean-Claude Van Johnson, where the premise of it is he plays another fictionalized version of himself, but the twist on it is that Jean-Claude Van Damme's whole career has actually been a cover-up for him being an actual secret agent. And so while he's shooting in this series, this dumb action movie version of Huckleberry Finn, he is also in the middle of trying to stop like this group of terrorists who they think are initially drug dealers, but it turns out they have like a secret weather device and stuff like that. It's only 6 episodes long. It got canceled after that 6 episodes. And watching it, it's that weird shame of just like, despite how dumb that premise sounds, the show is kind of brilliant.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. It's definitely brilliant. I've been trying to get anybody to watch this show since I saw it, and nobody does because when you explain to them what it is, they're like, that sounds fucking dumb. And it is, but it's brilliant in how silly it is and how it does not take itself seriously at all.
Well, no, it's a weird thing where it does at times, but it's so phenomenal the way it does it, because it's a weirdly, despite how silly that premise sounds, and there's like a weather machine and the Huckleberry Finn thing, all this other stuff, at the same time, I think it's Van Damme's best performance in anything, even with like a JCVD, because he's able to be like incredibly silly and even play multiple characters, including there's a point where he encounters like his biggest fan who just so happens to look exactly like Jean-Claude Van Damme, and he never acknowledges that he looks like Jean-Claude Van Damme, named Philippe. And it's Jean-Claude like being a bit more hunched over and having a weird voice that sounds like this the whole time, and it's so fucking funny. But there's a weird pathos to both him and even Jean-Claude Van Johnson, like facing his own like fucking fan and all this other shit. It is stunning how it manages to be both a really funny, satiric, silly series and also an introspective look into Jean-Claude's like regrets about his career and his life and how much he's had to like fucking go through. I am shocked at how fucking amazing Jean-Claude Van Johnson is, and I would recommend it especially because there were 30-minute episodes and there's only 6 of them, so you can watch it in an afternoon.
Yeah, I mean 100%. I can't highly recommend it enough. It's top tier parody material. It's fantastic.
Stunning. But that is the end of our extended review, as it were, so we're going to go to the close of the show, though stay tuned for us doing our picking at the end of the show. In fact, we do have a bit of feedback we wanted to read in reference to the review, where James Rodriguez, previous guest on the show, at RoddersJ04, had his suggestions for a double review related to last week's topic of 2021 movies so far, where he says, 1, glad to see the Mitchells vs. the Machines and Slack mentioned on here. For good picks of my own, the somber look at Grief Pig, and the love child of Toy Story 3 and a slasher film, Benny Loves You. And then as for bad, the nostalgia orgy that is Space Jam: A New Legacy, and the regressive music.
I mean, out of all of those, I've only seen Space Jam, and I definitely agree that is a dumpster fire of a film.
We've both seen Space Jam: A New Legacy. We did an episode where we covered Space Jam not too long ago, and I talked about how like, I feel so like fucking sad watching this. Space Jam: A New Legacy is somehow so much more sad and pathetic, and even less of a movie.
Yeah, it's awful.
It's somehow worse than Cherry, which we dogged on last episode. It is worse than Cherry.
It's somehow worse than Cherry.
Stunning.
And I don't understand.
But I mean, I'm very curious to see Pig, though. I've heard like great things, and I'm very excited, especially with the premise of just, it's a revenge movie where Nicolas Cage wants to get back his pig. But I've heard it's like, it's genuinely like quiet and soulful, and it's one of Cage's like most serious dramatic performances in so long. I'm like, in like a motherfucker.
Yeah, I'll definitely check it out. I mean, it's not something I'm necessarily going to seek out, but if I catch it somewhere, I'll definitely watch it for sure.
And yeah, I mean, I've heard of Benny Loves You. That seems interesting. I've heard surprisingly good things about that. I know some music. That was the one that Sia made, that starred Kate Hudson and got like all the infamous things about like the people who had autism having issues with it, and she lashed out at people who had autism about like, fuck you, I can cast a non-autistic person. This is my movie. I can do what I want. Like, Sia, stop. Just stop hanging from that chandelier. Just get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, I forgot about that whole thing.
Yeah, but can you believe that happened this year?
No.
But thank you for that feedback, James, and anyone else who wants to submit feedback, definitely do, especially for your own reviews, as it were. We'd love to read them on the show. We also want to thank some people like Chris Oliver for the intro and outro music used in our show. Listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Christian Thor Lally for our great artwork. Follow him on Twitter at Night of Water. That's night with a K, _of_water, to see all his other great work. And thank you to our loyal Patreon subscribers, patreon.com/DEDBpod, where for just $1 a month, you all get to vote in polls where we cover things like Jean-Claude Van Damme, chosen by our lovely edgelord Patreon subscribers. And you get to listen to bonus podcasts as well. Like, stay tuned for later this week. We will have a new little rotation thing where we like doing at least one bonus podcast a month. And this time we're doing a little experiment called Tell a Belgian, where Adam and I recommend shows that the other person hasn't seen, and we talk about them. We'll be recording that soon, right after literally this episode's recorded, where Adam watches Gravity Falls that I recommended, and I watch Barry, which he recommended.
Yeah.
And and not too long after that, we'll also be doing On the Edge of Relevance, where we do talk about 2021 movies. This week that we're releasing, this is the week of The Green Knight coming out, and we're definitely planning on seeing that, because we're both very excited for the new picture with the Dev Patel all the people are swooning over, which, I mean, I get it.
Yeah, I can't wait to see that fucking movie. I cannot wait to see that fucking movie.
Yep, and we'll talk about it on The Edge of Relevance. And you can listen to those two things and all sorts of other great bonus podcasts we've done over the last year on there for just $1. $1 dinero.
Yeah.
And for more of us, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook at DEDBpod. And also you can email us feedback at doubleedgedoublebill@gmail.com, all spelled out. And, if you can't support us on the Patreon, why not help us out by buying some merchandise at the ESO TeePublic store with our logo on it. There'll be a link in the description where you can buy a mug or a t-shirt, all sorts of other things with our great logo on it. So how can they really help us out, Adam, since we get a kickback from that?
Buy our merch. Buy our merch.
You gotta really sell it with a Jean-Claude noise.
Oh, buy our merch. Yeah.
Yeah, goddamn right. And for more of my own individual antics, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at NotTheWho'sTommy. I also do some writing at marianithomas.wordpress.com and film-cred.com. I also probably have in the description here a link to I was a guest on a friend of the show, Rafe Telsh's podcast. Have not seen this. I'm the first three-peater guest for his show, where I went on and talked about the underrated Martin Scorsese classic, The King of Comedy, and I promise it's not all Joker bashing, though there is a fair amount in there.
Well, look at you, Mr. Big Shot. Three-peating motherfucker.
Hey, better to be king 3 times than schmuck for a lifetime.
That's hey. Yeah, all right. You can find me on Twitter or Instagram at Atom or Adam. That's ATOM _OR _ADAM. Or you can find me on Letterboxd at Schwanson. That's SCHWANDTSON.
Yes, for all his hot takes on film.
Not really that hot.
So hot! Oh, the burn around the oven hot! Hot takes!
For my review of Timecop on Letterboxd, I did write a piece of erotic fanfic.
Yes, it's glorious writing.
So.
Brilliant stuff there. And for more of our antics on here, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and other podcasting platforms. If you're listening on ESO, why not listen to all the other great shows on there? And you can also dig into the archives on our Podbean main feed for shows even before we joined ESO. And nothing else if you can't. Buy that merch or subscribe to the Patreon for just $1. The completely, I believe, free way, yes, that's what I'm seeing here, free way to help us out is to rate, review, or simply share the show around, because that gets us more visibility and gets people to join our own underground fight ring. I mean podcast community. That's what we do here.
Yeah, not that hard, too. You know what I mean? The fight ring or the podcast community. It's just a bunch of slouches and losers.
But both, to be fair, require the heart of a lion to do.
Heart of a lion.
Heart of a lion.
Heart of a lion. Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you, Joshua.
Thank you, Joshua. Yes, wherever you are. But now, Adam, it's time we got to our picking for next week's episode, because every week, as I mentioned at the top, we both either have 2 good or 2 bad movies that we assign numbers to, and then the other person picks a random number between 1 and 10, and whatever that number is closest to ends up being our good or bad feature. And you have the 2 bad, I have the 2 good for this particular week that we're going to do. Though keep in mind, we do have something called the Godfather rule implemented, where from now until May of 2022, when we have our next anniversary, Adam and I each have a single veto that we have to use by that point in our back pocket. So if someone says, oh, like, hey, I picked this particular number, oh, that gets closest to this particular choice for either good or bad, Adam and I have the potential to say, you know what? Actually, I'll take the cannoli on that, which thus means the veto is used, and the other choice ends up being our pick. And for this particular week, in honor of The Suicide Squad is coming out, we're doing something a bit interesting, a little subgenre of kind of like action-adventure filmmaking. We're talking about Men on a Mission movies, where that's a big influence for James Gunn, apparently, with this new Suicide Squad, was stuff like The Dirty Dozen and other movies like that that involve a bunch of people going out on a big mission that could lead to their deaths. And it's an interesting subgenre that I'm curious to see what our picks are for.
Yeah, definitely. Me too. I'm very, very curious how this is going to go.
Yes. But I have the two good, and Adam has the two bad. So, Adam, for my two good choices, please pick a number between 1 and 10.
I will go with number 6.
Okay, you could veto this, but my choice that I have here at number 7 is one I'm very excited to talk about. I've wanted to talk about this movie on the show for so long, and I think it's a great, very underrated movie. From Mr. Walter Hill, I have 1984's Streets of Fire.
Oh, hell yeah.
Oh, you're not taking the cannoli, I assume?
Fuck no. We are definitely talking about Streets of Fire, baby.
Fuck yes, I'm so down. Oh, of course. But at number 2, I had another choice. I wouldn't have been against the movie I haven't seen, but maybe I'm kind of glad because it's a very long movie. Apparently, that's why I haven't watched it for so long. Is the classic The Great Escape. Also a great, great movie, but I think Streets of Fire is going to be way more fun to talk about. Oh, baby.
Yeah. All right.
Now, your two bad choices, Adam. I am going to pick number 3.
Okay. At number 2, I have a movie with just a fucking stellar cast, man, that just failed miserably. I have the, I don't even know what you would classify it. I have The Monuments Men.
Okay. The George Clooney directed film.
Yeah, with fucking, like, the cast is crazy. But do you want to take the cannoli on that?
You know, I've heard it's very bad, but at the same time, it is one of the few George Clooney movies that he's directed I haven't seen, and I think there's a lot we can talk about, even if the movie's not good. I think there's a lot around the movie we can definitely talk about, so I will not be taking the cannoli on that, sir.
All right. And at number 9, I have Space Truckers with Dennis Hopper.
Oh, the from the late great Stuart Gordon.
Yes. It's a terrible film.
I have not seen that particular film, but okay. So, Monuments Men and Streets of Fire. Very interesting double feature we'll be having next week.
Different.
Very different, for sure, yes.
I'm into it.
Yeah, for sure. We'll be talking all about that next week. But until then, Adam, it's time that you really captured the heart of the lion. And please get me some KFC. I'm very hungry.
I would fuck up some KFC right now.
Hey, look, just save some for me, especially those drumsticks. Good night, everybody.
Yeah.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.